lost our appeal. What else is on Thursday nights?
Good evening. I welcome you to the forum. I'm Arlene Brown, President of the Missoula League of Women Voters. I would like to thank our two candidates, Mary Lou Crowley and John Engen. Lou Ann Crowley and John Engen for participating in this final mayoral forum. I would also like to thank MCAT for broadcasting this event live. I would also like to introduce the co-sponsors. The co-sponsors of this forum are the Missoula Senior Citizens Center with Annette Sontag, Director, Missoula Aging Services, Susan Kohler, Director, and Pi Sigma Alpha, the UM Political Science Honor Society with President Monica Comans. Could those sponsors please stand up so that you can be recognized? And we would like to thank you for sponsoring this. I also want to thank Sharon Barra, who is our moderator this evening. Sharon is a professor at the University Journalism School. Tonight's format is as follows. The candidates will be asked to introduce themselves. We will then have questions asked by our moderator for approximately the first half of the forum. At 7:55, there will be a break of 10 minutes. After the break, the moderator will ask the audience's questions. If you have a question, please write it on a file card and submit it by raising the card in the air. We will collect all questions at 7:30. Your questions will be screened for duplication and clarity. Let me now introduce our moderator, Sharon Barrett.
Put this on here with it's still making noise. Everybody can hear me okay? I'm pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to have been asked to participate in this. I would like to welcome our candidates and say also that I think it's probably been for all the years I've lived in Missoula, maybe a marathon campaign. I've never quite seen one quite like this. It's gone on for so long, so your stamina ought to be acknowledged for both of you, I think. And so now we have John Fletcher here, who's our timekeeper to keep us on track. As Arlene said, the first thing that we will do is ask each of you to introduce yourselves and ask with the question here already to start with is, and we will begin with Luann and then I'll move on to John. Each of you gets 2 minutes. And the question is, how are you distinctively different from and preferable to your opponent? And why would you be better for the job of mayor of Missoula? So, Luann, take it away.
Take it away. Well, you know, there's a huge difference between the two candidates sitting before you, and I've been thinking all day about the best way to show you that difference. And I finally settled on these 2 examples. If you remember a few months ago, back when the fire department announced that they were going to tear down Station 2 and rebuild it, Jean and Joe Bernofsky live right next door to the fire station, and they emailed us and said, what about our tree? Please help us. Well, I remember reading John's email back to them, and it said, you know, I feel for you, but I believe that the fire department and the architect have done everything that they can do, and I'm sorry. Well, I listened to them, and I thought, you know what, let's take the fire chief out and the architect. We went out there, and we were able to move that fire station, on paper of course, 10 feet back to the west, so that that tree that they loved was able to be saved, and they could rest easier. Over the last 6 months, John has said a number of times, you know, he doesn't want to squabble about the alley houses anymore. And I don't blame him, because he, all along, his votes have helped put them there. And when citizens came and told us that they were concerned and they were very upset about our infill policies and they weren't working, I listened. And then I voted to hire an attorney to fight the folks who had brought a lawsuit against the city because they wanted to build in people's backyards. And you know what? We won. And now those citizens can rest easier. We need a mayor who will listen to the community and not continue on with the way it's been going, and I will be that mayor. We need a leader who will protect our quality of life as we grow, and I will be that mayor. We need a mayor who will not back down, who will stand up for Missoula values. I will be that mayor. Vote for leadership you can trust. Thank you.
John, your turn.
And I have nothing but faith in Missoula's voters today, and I think that ultimately voters will decide who's best suited to be mayor of Missoula. So I think the best way for me to start this is by introducing myself as someone who is interested in at least the following three things and a few more. And my stump speech hasn't changed a great deal because I believe in these things, and I want to move forward with them and move our community forward as well. I believe in open space. I think when we talk about quality of life in the city of Missoula, a big tangible piece of that is our access to open space. The open space that we've protected through a bond this community passed 10 years ago. The folks here invested in protecting and preserving our quality of life, and I think it's time to do that again, and I'd like us to do that again in 2006. I'm interested in building houses. I think we need to have homes for seniors, for young people, and for folks in between, and I think we need to have choices in housing and opportunity. I think housing provides a chance for folks to become middle class, and when I say middle class, I'm talking about that in the best sense of the word. A middle class person in Missoula, Montana, I think, is comfortable enough to make good choices about how they live, how they educate their children, how they go to work, how they engage in business, how they volunteer, how they participate, how they encourage. I think a middle-class existence is something that comes with home ownership, and we need opportunity and choice for that. I also believe that our rules and regulations are a little bit bumpy, a little bit cumbersome, a little bit complicated, and I think we can work together to improve those and to improve the way we enforce them and interpret them.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to the questions. These are questions that have been prepared by, I think it is committee members from the league. They've been put together by a group of people. And now we will also alternate. This time we begin with John, and you get 1.5 minutes. A little less time, and I have to say that I think maybe this first question is perhaps longer than the answer may be, but here it goes. It's long, it's many-pronged, and so listen up.
Oh, good.
Okay. The Broadway diet, the reduction of a very busy commercial business district to 2 lanes, and a plan to widen Arthur Avenue are both controversial because of perceived negative effects on existing surroundings. Business owners along Broadway are upset that their businesses are suffering. University area residents worry that Arthur Avenue plan would require removing houses, increase the difficulty of UM students crossing Arthur to classes, and damage one of Missoula's most beautiful and historic residential neighborhoods. The Broadway reduction is basically underway, so our questions about that are you happy with the way it's going? What, if any, changes do you foresee need to be made? As for the Arthur Avenue plan, would you explain how this plan facilitates traffic management and pedestrian safety? And what stand would you take with the Montana Department of Transportation regarding concerns of university area residents? John.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First on West Broadway, we have safety concerns on West Broadway, and the option that was left to us by the state of Montana on that stretch of road was a 3-lane configuration. This is not a 2-lane system, it's a 3-lane system. It's 2 lanes with a turning lane. Before we had 4 lanes with no turning lanes. So I think that's important, an important distinction to make. The system is on the ground. There are things we can do to continue to improve it. One is make sure that we provide the access for the businesses along that stretch. 2 is we need to add the lights. That is the overhead lighting that lights up that corridor in the evening so that we can see folks, so that pedestrians can safely cross. And I think we need to give it some time. I've spent quite a bit of time down on West Broadway, and frankly, I'm having a hard time not getting through there easily. It's been pretty smooth sailing in my experience. Arthur, the city is currently working with the state to try to make sure that we make that a safe passage for everyone. And right now there's about a 90-foot stretch of asphalt for students and lots of other folks to cross. The city doesn't believe that that's the best alternative, so we're going to continue to work with the neighborhood, with the university, with the state to ensure that that's a safe crossing.
That was, I think John covered it pretty well. The point now is to be sensitive to the businesses on Broadway. As we give it time to see how things are going, you'll hear from some people that they have no problems, and other people find that there's a heck of a backup. So it's going to take some time to even out. But I think being as sensitive as we can to the business people down there, helping them with access, getting the lights set up is very important. I've been to a couple of the meetings on the Arthur Street expansion. And again, this is a state project, as John mentioned. The city is kind of a partner, not necessarily a partner, but an advisor in this. And I know that we can have some influence. But there's been a citizen proposal brought forward that I think if we combine the two or even consider the citizen proposal, that will give us some good options. The important thing is for people to know that the State Department of Transportation is willing to listen. When they come to town, they at first weren't aware of how vocal and involved Missoulians like to be. I could tell that. So I'm hoping that this time that they will be more open to listening to our input, because we are the ones who will live with their decision.
Okay. Okay, we'll reverse order, and I'll have to try to keep track of this. So, Luann, you're on first this time. This question, a little shorter. Earlier last month, America's Promise, a national nonprofit organization or a consortium of nonprofits, named Missoula one of the top 100 communities for raising children. What would you do to make Missoula one of the top 100 communities viewed as elder-friendly?
Oh, great question. Well, let's see. If you go through what they wanted for children, it was caring adults was one of the first ones. And that's what we need, what we have in a way with Missoula Aging Service, with senior citizens. Actually, John and I both attended the celebration of that award today, and we brainstormed all the different ways that children or our youth experience America's Promise in Missoula. And I think that would be a great exercise to do for our senior citizens. So caring adults was one. And then you start thinking, you start brainstorming, how do we make sure that our elderly citizens have contact with people in this community? We have some great organizations that reach out to them. Another one was health care for our youth. Now, this is major for our senior citizens. That's why the city supports Partnership Health. That's a good way for citizens, senior citizens, to get especially their prescriptions taken care of at a very reduced price. Let me see. I think in general, America's Promise to the seniors has to come from awareness and from support for the organizations that we already have on the ground, and find out what are the things that they need further.
And I think that the things that make Missoula a wonderful place for youth and children are many of the same things that make Missoula a wonderful place for elderly folks and for folks, again, in between. One of the things we learned this morning was that collaboration is key and communication is key. And I think we're fortunate to have an organization like Aging Services as engaged and as far-reaching as it is in supporting the needs of the elderly in our community. But beyond that, we as a city, I think, try to engage in lots of activities, again, that are collaborative in nature, that range from funding some of these organizations through our Office of Planning and Grants, cooperatively with the county, to doing some of the basic things that cities do well. We try to keep our streets safe. We provide police and fire protection. We provide emergency medical response. We patch potholes. We make sure that the traffic lights work. So those are some of the basics that come with making a city a great place for everyone. And those collaborations, I think, continue to be critical.
Okay, thank you. John, next question for you first. What specific plan, including a plan for traffic management, do you have for dealing with Missoula's growth?
Sure, and that's the 1.5-minute question?
Yes.
Okay. My specific plan is a continuation of what the city has been doing in cooperation with the county and the state over the course of the last several years and beyond that. We have a transportation plan in part. We also have some specific road plans that come into play as well, especially as we develop west of town. We're trying to create a grid system that, again, works to accommodate not only vehicles but folks on foot and folks on bike. Only by expanding that grid system and providing alternatives, I think, do we temper the congestion. We're working on Russell Street, improving that corridor. We're going to continue to work on improving the Broadway corridor. Reserve Street's tough, but I think the things we do west of there will continue to help. So as we move through our transportation plan, I think that's our best bet over time and incrementally to temper our traffic woes.
That's definitely the way to go when you come to the automobile, because the automobile is here to stay, regardless probably of what we do to encourage alternative transportation. I mean, this city, in the transportation plan, has set a goal of reducing our vehicle miles traveled per day by 10% over the next few years. That's a lot of miles. We're traveling well over 1 million miles a day in this town. So first you make sure that the traffic is flowing smoothly. That helps with air pollution. And then you start working on different ways for people to get around town. We try to encourage the use of the bus. The bus system that we have, and which it's great to have, will only get better if we use it. So how do we make that happen? Do we get passes for the seniors? We also use the iRide van pool. I'm on the board of Mr. TMA. Those are the vans that come in from Lake County and from the Bitterroot. Now, they come in and drop people off. And it's been suggested that if we could have those vans during the day, then seniors might have a better time of getting rides to the hospital and getting rides around town. So that's one way where we could start working together to find out better use of the infrastructure that we have.
Okay. All right, Luann,
Yes?
the current mayor has on occasion been criticized for nominating or not nominating people to boards, commissions, and agencies, depending on whether they agree with his viewpoints. How would you go about selecting and nominating people for boards, commissions, and agencies? These people carry out government policies even though they are volunteers. Will you use some kind of merit system? Will the city boards reflect the community or the mayor's viewpoint?
We have some great volunteers. These are people who put a lot of time into the Design Review Board, the Board of Adjustment, the Planning Board, the Animal Control Board. In fact, I helped start a picnic for them, an annual picnic, to say thank you to them every year for doing all that work for nothing. So I would say that you have to look at each board individually. You know, the mayor generally can appoint someone, but he has to do it with he or she has to do it with the consent of the city council. So you're going to try to bring someone who reflects an attitude or opinion that the city council can accept. And you have to be very specific about what boards you're looking at. Some boards require quite a bit of expertise, like our Board of Adjustment does, or our Design Review Board does. So those are fairly easy. You can bring somebody on who has the expertise that that board needs. I think it would be a good thing. Oftentimes we put it in the newspaper, but it would be good to start advertising on our local government channel. That way, people get to know what these boards do so that more people will be attracted to those positions.
Pardon me. My experience hiring folks is about 15 years old, and I think first you need to consider the qualifications. What's the job, and who might or might not be qualified based on what the job is. And the second piece of business, I think, is I always look for folks who are reasonable, folks who are thoughtful, folks who are interested in listening and understanding someone else's point of view, and while not necessarily agreeing with that point of view, at least considering it and having some flexibility. And I think once you get past qualification and capacity, I think, to work with other folks and be reasonable and thoughtful and practical, I think there probably are political considerations as well, and that's part of what politics is about. And in some cases, the mayor may be very interested in promoting his or her point of view in the best interest of the community. And we have a check on that, and that's the council in many cases. So again, qualifications, a fine attitude, and somebody who can generally move the city forward based on the goals.
Okay, thank you. And John, now to you, back and forth here, this little yo-yo. With the rise in energy costs and the need for conservation of resources, how can city government become a leader in energy savings or cost reduction?
Well, I think we get back to some of the basics, and that's turn off the lights when you leave the bathroom as a place to start. And that's something, we used to do that. I remember years ago, even in school, it was you turned off the lights. So I think some of that basic conservation comes into play. We're also doing some things, I think, with our vehicle fleet. We have to have vehicles at the city. And a couple of those today, or at least one of them, is a hybrid. We've considered some alternative fuels as well. I think one of the things I personally believe we can do to help defray energy costs in the future is continue to participate with Montana Public Power in attempting to purchase Northwestern's generation and transmission, transmission and distribution, so that we have some control over our energy future.
The city has created a greenhouse gas and energy efficiency subcommittee of the City Council. We worked on that for a long time to get different members of the community, like the Home Resource, people from Roscoe Steel, a wide variety of people who could advise the council on how to reduce energy throughout the city. And this came out of the fact that we signed on to a nationwide League of Cities declaration saying that we would try to reduce greenhouse gas and promote energy efficiency. As I said before, I'm on the board of Mr. TMA, the people who do the iRide van pool, and we're right next to the biodiesel bus down at the university. The university has been a real leader in this community in providing ways for us to reduce our energy consumptions. And it would be great if we could start making our fleet, as John mentioned, have biodiesel as their fuel. I think the simple understanding that if you are using energy and you leave the space, you reduce that by turning off the lights is a great way to begin. We changed the lights in our exit signs in City Hall all over the place because we found that it was taking a lot of energy to keep them going, and we changed the light bulbs, and that helped. And we're trying to find ways through this greenhouse gas and energy efficiency committee to do more of that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Luann, your turn to start. One of Missoula's former mayors once said that despite the big issues facing the city, the complaints and concerns most often heard in City Hall had to do with things like loose dogs and feral cats. We've heard a lot about the big issues such as traffic and infill. From your vantage points as council members, what would you say are the major pesky little things that Missoulians are concerned about, and what would you do to deal with those complaints and concerns?
Well, actually, the dogs off leash has come up. As you know, we've had a couple of pit bull attacks, and it's brought the city's awareness to that issue again. And I believe that the reason it is so stirring right now is that because of growth, we have more and more people using our facilities along the river, using our trails, using our parks. Do you know that we have 6,000 dogs registered in this town? And Animal Control believes there are probably at least 4,000 more unregistered. This is a dog town. We love our dogs, and that's great. But when you hear senior citizens come up to you and say, I'm afraid to walk downtown because I'm afraid I'm going to be bumped over by a large dog off leash, you have to take that seriously. So right now, we're in the process of reviewing the ordinance, coming up with some short and long-term solutions on how to handle this problem that people feel there is about dogs off leash. And one of the things that I've suggested is that we try to approach it the way we did with fireworks. We start by making PSAs, asking some people who are even in this audience to say, this is how it feels when dogs come at me, when they're off leash and I feel unprotected and afraid I might fall and break my hip. So if people start getting the understanding and awareness of what it feels to be roached by dogs off leash, perhaps they'll change their behavior.
The devil, as they say, is in the details, right? So, depending on the week, I hear about parking meters. I hear about occasionally potholes. We hear about barking dogs. We hear about fences. We hear about alleys that are impassable. We hear about parties. We hear about noise. And one of the things that I think we can do better as a city is try to figure out a way so that when folks have a complaint, have an issue, have a problem, we deal with it in a way that doesn't exacerbate the problem, leave that person feeling even more frustrated, and never really take care of the difficulty. And one of the things I've been talking a little bit about is applying some of the resources in the mayor's office, at least as a start, to create a system where we have more or less a clearinghouse. If you've got an issue, there's one number you can call, and that person will help you understand our system, which isn't the easiest system to understand, as hard as that may be to believe. And once we do that, we can kind of herd folks to a solution and a resolution that's a little more satisfying, a little more quickly, and I think everybody's a little happier. So that's something that would begin on January 3rd or so.
Okay. We'll take a moment now to ask the audience if you have a question that you filled out on the cards that were given to you. If you would raise your hand, and I think somebody will be coming around to pick up these cards. So, you have questions? No questions? Oh, you have them all in already.
Oh, I thought we'd finally warn you all out.
So the questions have already been collected, all right? Okay. All right, in that case, we will continue with you guys, okay? And so, John, as the city of Missoula grows and the demand for services increases, Explain your plan to secure funding for these services.
Continues to be a challenge and will continue to be a challenge for the next 10 years. The city's, excuse me, worked on a financial plan that sort of lays out what our scenario is for the next decade or so, and we're up against challenges. As the question suggests, we have continuing demand for services and limited opportunities to increase revenue. So some of the things we've done and some of the things I think we need to continue to do are look at our fee structure and make sure that users are paying for what they're using in a fair way so that taxpayers aren't necessarily subsidizing things that they shouldn't be subsidizing or subsidizing them to a degree that's onerous. And we've done some other things. I'm pretty proud of a piece of legislation we passed about 2 years ago now. That's impact fees. We used a state law that allows municipalities to charge development, in effect, for the services, for buying into the services that we use, fire stations, parks, police stations, et cetera. That's a pretty good piece of business. In addition, I think we need to continue as a municipality working with other cities and towns in the state on a local option tax so that we can capture some revenue from the folks who visit us and use our services, but don't necessarily leave much behind.
You know, in general, I think people are looking for us to be more concerned about what they're paying for taxes, because everything is going up. We did pass impact fees. That was a way of asking the people who come in here and come into new development to pay, as John said, the cost for things like police, fire, and parks. Now, our police and fire departments are, and even our parks department, are very good at getting grants. They get grants for officers, sometimes just that first year, first 2 or 3 years, and then we pick up the tab for training, for things like that. But in the end, we are adding more and more as we put things on, like the aquatics. That's an SID that you are all playing. We're putting on an SID or a bond for our fire department. Then perhaps we'll have an open space bond. Then a police, it's going to be called a public safety facility for our police and sheriff. So we're looking at a lot of requests to our citizens. And that means when we go to budget time, we need to be finding ways that help us remove costs to the taxpayer. Because as we ask you to pay more on one side, we should be also looking to find ways to help relieve the cost to you for other services.
Okay, thank you. And you get to continue.
Okay.
On the next question. 3 recent ordinances passed by City Council, landscaping and buffering, off-street parking, and multi-dwelling, all allow an applicant to deviate from requirements by appealing to the Design Review Board instead of the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment has tougher criteria for variances, and its decision must be appealed to the District Court. Design Review Board decisions are appealed to the City Council. State law mandates variances from ordinance must show a hardship. As mayor, would you support sending appeals to the Design Review Board instead of the Board of Adjustment, and why?
And these are just on the landscaping and buffering?
That's what the question's asking.
Okay.
But I think that it opens up into more general whether this difference between the way the jurisdiction of these 2 boards.
Right. This idea of hardship is particular to the Board of Adjustment. And so this is an interesting question. In fact, we've started a subcommittee. We've passed these ordinances on landscaping and buffering. And we've learned from the community and from those who have to work under those ordinances that they feel there are problems with them. So we have created a subcommittee to deal with that. As far as which board to do that, I'm sure the council had its reasons for going to the Design Review Board. These are people who are architects, who are involved in design, and may perhaps be more familiar with what a hardship would constitute for somebody who's working in trying to landscape a multifamily situation. At this point, I wouldn't say I was in favor of either one. If it's been sent to the Design Review Board, I'd say let's stick with that.
And I think the Design Review Board is fine for those circumstances. Those particular ordinances are less about hardship and more about standards and being able to offer some flexibility to applicants, because as we've learned with the landscaping and buffering ordinance, which Luann and I spent countless hours together working on, we find that sometimes legislation is not it doesn't turn out as well on the ground as we might have hoped. And we're learning that, and I think that's okay for us to admit that and try to make some changes so that legislatively we try to do that. And not all circumstances are going to work within our rules, and I think we need to have that kind of flexibility. Design Review Board's a good group of folks, much as the Board of Adjustment is, and I think they're certainly qualified to make some judgments based on our rules and regs. And I think having those decisions appealed to council is fine as well. Ultimately, having elected officials make some choices makes pretty good sense to me.
Okay, thank you. John, considering high prices of housing in Missoula and the need of affordable housing for students, what would you recommend about housing occupancy standards?
I did not support an occupancy standards ordinance that came before City Council, and I wouldn't support a similar ordinance today because it included a family definition that I find discriminatory and impossible, more or less impossible to enforce. Occupancy in our market is absolutely a function of vacancy. We've been fortunate in the last several years that we built enough, we collectively, the community, ended up with enough housing units, enough rental units, that we actually have a vacancy rate now. And I think it's a much healthier rental market than it was. And I think that starts to temper some of those issues. And also, I think, starts to temper the price and make the market healthier. Part of occupancy standards had to do with behavior. Some crowded student housing makes folks nuts, and I'm not sure that I necessarily I think that's probably justified. So what we need to do as a community, I think, then, is figure out ways to modify that behavior rather than figure out ways to determine who's living together, where, and when. There are safety issues, there are behavior issues, and I think we can address both of those. Affordability, I think, is a function of supply.
Luann?
Well, I think that discussion about affordability as a function of supply is a much bigger question that we need as a community to address. With regard to occupancy, that came about mostly due to overcrowding and safety issues. And as John has said, with the building of so many rental spaces, that pressure, there was a lot of pressure on the town to have housing. The university hadn't really kept up with providing housing for its students at the time. And that particular ordinance created a lot of divisiveness in the town. It was hard on us, but it brought about some really good things, like the Renter Center at the university that is an advocate for students when they find themselves in difficult situations. Lots of times, if you have a problem in your apartment, you might be afraid to say anything to the landlord in fear of retaliation. So the Renter Center is there. It also brought about new housing down on the south end of campus. All those new places by the bus stop, by the Mr. TMA office, that came out of that discussion because the university admitted it needed more housing. We also got a quality of life officer who has been a wonderful asset to this town. And it works both ways. That quality of life officer is there for all citizens, whether they're students or homeowners.
Okay. Luann, again? Theoretically, Missoula has a good strict sign ordinance. Exceptions were recently made for 2 big chain businesses. When this occurs, it is viewed as unfair to those small businesses that faithfully comply with the sign ordinances. How should such requests for exceptions be handled in the future?
Well, I'm sure they'll be handled the same way. This goes back to the Design Review Board. This is the board of volunteers, of experts, as you might say, who have worked for years with companies in this town to develop their sign packages. And so when a company comes in and asks for a variance, they have the expertise and the experience to know how that will work with not only the ordinance, but Missoula values and the standards that we have come to expect. I'm sure you're referring to the Hilton sign, and that was a case where that company was drawn here because of the quality of this town, the unique character we have, attracted them. And yet their desire to have their sign at a different height than our standard, now, does that affect the uniqueness and character that they came for? That's the question. We also have to consider, both John and I visited the people who live behind Home Depot. It's called Hellgate Meadows. Reserve Street area is their backyard. That's what they told us. They said, when you start putting signs up at the 6th floor level of the Hilton, we start losing our ability to see the sky. We have to be very aware of the impacts when we start offering variances to these large companies who want to vary from our ordinances.
And I think standards change with circumstances and time. Our standards today don't really describe what we want to do with a 6-story building on Reserve Street, I don't think. And I think if you head out to that stretch of North Reserve, you'll find that our standard appears to be pretty varied and pretty inconsistent. I think we need to work on those standards. I'm a small business person who has a sign, and I faithfully adhered to the standards in our sign ordinance, and that sign is licensed and it passes muster with the city of Missoula. I think the sign, now that it's up on the Hilton Garden Inn, meets the intent of that sign ordinance, which is to reduce visual clutter, among other things. But in this case, I don't think the other things apply. I think this is a question of visual clutter, and I don't think this is a cluttered circumstances. We made a similar choice with the Courtyard Marriott, which is across the street from the Hilton. And again, I think the sign there, taken as a package, which is allowed in our ordinance, works just fine, and I don't think it's done anything detrimental to the character of Missoula. We need to continue to look at our standards as our circumstances change. And if we need to be stricter, we need to be stricter. And if we need to be a little more flexible, we need to do that.
The next question is on a subject that both of you have already referred to, and that is the Montana Public Power incorporated the notion of the city of Missoula joining with 4 other Montana cities to try to buy the Northwestern Energy. The question basically is, how would you characterize the risks involved in this venture? And if you think the risks are too great, would you as mayor help the city council reconsider Missoula's participation?
If I thought the risks were too great, I would absolutely help the city council reconsider that. But today I don't know if the risks are too great. What I do know is that there is an opportunity here for a number of cities in Montana, and therefore the citizens of Montana, to take a hard look at having some real ownership of our energy resources for the foreseeable future. This isn't perfect, and it's not a complete package, but I think it's well worth taking a look at. And I think the price today, we've spent upwards of $100,000 today, taking it this far. The Public Power has asked us for another $100,000 to engage in due diligence in the event that Northwestern Energy accepts an offer that MPPI has made. Here are the risks today. I think anyone else out there may be able to purchase Northwestern Energy, or Northwestern Energy may be able to operate under the circumstances it's operated under, which has not been in the best interest of, I think, the ratepayers in Montana. Folks ask, will the taxpayers bear more risk here? I think ratepayers will bear a risk regardless of ownership. But if we have ownership, we have some control. That's not a 1.5-minute question.
It is very complicated. And the second part, as mayor, the city council, well, of course, with the mayor's vote, went forward with this due diligence and voted for the $100,000. So I feel that I would not pull back. In fact, we have the, you might call it a safety net, because the PSC would have to review the purchase if we went through with this. I felt the risks were too great considering what we were going to get. If we were going to get more for what we were going to do, I would have gone for this, because I believe in public power. I think that's a good option, and whenever we can control our destiny, we should take that chance. We should go after it. But we were taking on, as you know, $2.3 billion in debt. And we were having that financed 100%. So that where was our reserve? In case the rates came up, we weren't able to provide PSC with the ability to say, this is our rate, we've looked at the numbers and we want this rate. And the PSC would say, that's not doable. You have to go back. Where is our reserve to cover that except going to the ratepayer? We are just like Northwest Energy. We have to go out on the open market. People are still thinking that just because we own transmission and distribution, we would be able to lower the rates for ratepayers, and that wasn't true.
You're right. Needs more than 1.5 minutes. Okay, Luann,
Yes.
are there deficiencies in the current university-city relationship? And if so, what are they, and how would you improve that relationship?
I think it's a relationship that needs to be improved. I think the city relationships in general, whether it's with the chamber, whether it's with the school board, with MDA, with a number of people, with the neighborhood councils, our relationships with our community need to be improved. And that's one of the reasons I'm running. I want to reach out to this community. We can't put a vision together if we don't get together. So with the university, we used to meet on a quarterly basis, and that's kind of slipped off. And generally, there's an agenda that we talk about, some things that are of concern for the university, some things of concern for the city. One thing I would do would be to involve more ASUM. Those folks, ASUM are elected officials of a small city, 13,000 or so students. They need to be at the table along with the administration of the university and the administration of the city. That's so important. I think there's tremendous room for improvement for our relationships, and I think when you put yourself out and say, I'm willing to meet you, please come and sit at the table, let's see what we can do to better our relationship, then things start to click.
I think we have some great collaborations going today that have to do with transportation, that have to do with some of our recreation programs, that have to do with our open space lands. And I think those relationships can only improve, and I think Luann's absolutely right. Part of it's reaching out. Part of it's being a little more focused. As mayor, my inclination would be to spend a lot more time in Missoula than Mayor Cadiz has been able to spend lately. And that's been an evolution, I think, of his leadership. But if I'm privileged enough to serve the community, I'll be I'll be walking around and talking a lot and trying to enhance those relationships and build some new ones.
Okay. John, please define your position on expectations that the Brook Street Walmart wants to convert to a super Walmart. If such a conversion occurred, what effect would there be on the nearby residential neighborhood and the Cold Springs K through 5 grade school across the street from the Walmart site?
Okay.
Take it.
If Walmart expands, what's the implication for the neighborhood? Is
Basically that.
Okay. I suspect there'd be additional traffic problems, which I think have certainly manifested themselves at about Mullen Road and Reserve Street. I think there'd be manifold impacts, and I guess I wouldn't spend too much time looking in my crystal ball. What I would say is that I believe Walmart agreed some time ago that it would limit its expansion there, and I think they need to stick to that agreement, and certainly as mayor of the city of Missoula, I'd expect them to stick to that agreement. I have to tell you that I'm not an enormous fan of Walmart's business practices.
I don't know if they necessarily agreed. We voted it down. They came in a few years ago and asked for this expansion. And we examined it in the context of our comprehensive plan. And we heard from the neighbors that they experience already the noise and the diesel from the trucks that back into Walmart in their parking lot. We heard from them that they needed some kind of buffering because of the juxtaposition of their residential life with Walmart, which you know is huge. You know, some people say, well, let's do it. Maybe that will stop some of the traffic that goes all the way down to the superstore on Mullen and Reserve. But again, we have to go by what the law says. And if we have to do findings of fact, like we do on every other request for rezoning or change, do a findings of fact. What do they have a right to under the comprehensive plan, under the rules and regulations that we have? And what kind of negotiation can we do with them? If they have a right to do this, what kind of negotiation can we have with them to make sure that their impact is minimal to their surrounding neighbors?
Thank you. We're about to take a break, but before that, one quick and short question for each of you, starting with Luann and then John. If you were restricted to only 3 words to describe Missoula, what would they be?
Wide open spaces.
I have a fabulous joke, but I don't want to waste it. Well, I'm going to say the joke, yes, no, and maybe would be one. Actually, I like wide open spaces.
Yeah.
I'll buy that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We will take now a 10-minute break. I'm told that it's strictly 10 minutes. I don't know, John, are you going to be waving the people back on the table? And after that will then be questions from the audience. So, thank you.
Hello, my name is Nancy Maxon. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters Board of Directors. Since 1952, the Missoula League has provided nonpartisan voter service and voter education for the community. The League wants everyone to be an informed voter. During this break, we will give you facts about absentee ballots, early voting, acceptable ID for Election Day at the polls, the election office website, the bond issue, and a ward map with candidate names for city council seats. 8. Polling places are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you need to find out where to vote, you can call the elections office at 258-4751 or go online to www.co.missoula.mt.us/election or use a search site to find the Missoula Elections Office. If you do not have a computer, you can use one for free at the Missoula Public Library, Missoula Aging Services, or at the Missoula Senior Citizen Center. Everyone will need ID to vote. You may use a driver's license, a school district or post-secondary education photo ID, a Costco card, a tribal photo ID, your voter confirmation card, a current utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, or government document that shows your name and current address. If you forget your ID, you may vote on a provisional ballot. You then have until 5 p.m. to produce the information required in order to have your vote verified. The election officials at the poll will tell you what you need to provide. Anyone may vote on an absentee ballot. You must make an application for an absentee ballot and submit it to the elections office at 200 West Broadway in Missoula. Again, their phone number, 258-4751. Applications will be accepted until noon November 7th for this election. However, if you are applying by mail, you need to allow turnaround time for your receipt of the ballot and then for return of the ballot to the elections office. The ballot must be received at the elections office by 8 p.m. on Elections Day, November 8th. You may also vote early by going in person to the elections office, filling out an absentee ballot request, getting a ballot, and submitting your completed ballot right there. There is a bond issue for this election. There's a bond issue for $5,740,000 payable semi-annually over a period of 20 years. The purpose of the bond issue is to, 1, build a new fire station number 5 in the Linda Vista Miller Creek area, and equip it with a fire pumper and a wildland fire engine. There would also demolish and rebuild fire station number 2 at 247 Mount Avenue, and they would expand and remodel fire station number 3 at 1501 39th Street. The fire department has more information regarding this bond issue. On November 8, 2005, you will be voting for a mayor of Missoula. You will choose between two candidates, the two candidates we've been hearing from tonight, Lou Ann Crowley and John Engen. The League of Women Voters has made up this map to show ward boundaries. Copies of this map are available in the Missoula Public Library, at the mall, at Albertsons in Northgate, and in City Hall. The following are the respective candidates for each ward. Ward 1, Cass Chinsky and Dave Strohmeyer. Ward 2, John N. Couch and John Hendrickson. Ward 3, Lee Clemenson and Bob Jaffe. Ward 4, Timothy J. Lovely and John D. Wilkins. Ward 5, Mark Fitzgerald and Dick Haynes. And in Ward 6, Jeffrey James Halverson and Marilyn Marler. Please remember to vote on November 8th. I'd like at this time to extend an invitation to our Missoula League of Women Voters luncheon series. Our luncheons are the second Monday of each month, and they are this next November 14th luncheon will be held at the Missoula Public Library. The topic is the educational funding dilemma facing the state. On December 12th, the topic will be CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. Come at 11:45 and join us. Please bring a brown bag lunch, and the meetings will end at 1 p.m. You can watch for announcements in the newspaper. Also, I'd like to thank you for watching this forum on MCAT.
Hello, my name is Dan Doyle. It's my privilege to serve as the president of the governing board of Missoula Aging Services. Missoula Aging Services is a countywide nonprofit agency that's responsible for planning, coordinating, and delivering services which support the aged and the aging process. Missoula Aging Service is made up of a number of programs that are focused on seniors, their families, and caregivers. You may be familiar with some of these programs, like Meals on Wheels, the Senior Helpline, Foster Grandparents, Senior Companions, and RSVP. And these are just a few of the many MAS programs which serve elders and provide opportunities for seniors to be involved in their community through volunteerism. The funding for Missoula Aging Services comes from diverse sources, including federal, state, county, and city governments, but also from United Way and from grants and from the generous donations of individuals and businesses throughout our community. As more and more seniors request the assistance of Missoula Aging Services, it's critical that our elected officials understand the value and scope of this agency in order to support measures which ensure its abilities to meet those local needs. Missoula Aging Services is an important part of making sure that this is a community that's a good place to live for persons of all ages. For a comprehensive look at what it is that Missoula Aging Services does and the people it serves, I invite you to watch for our special insert, our annual report in the Missoulian on Tuesday, November 15th. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Annette Sontag, and I'm the director of the Missoula Senior Citizen Center. The center has been a part of the Missoula community since 1970. We currently serve anyone ages 50 or over as members, and we serve the community in general without membership, and we take visitors and volunteers of any age. We provide a wide range of activities for our members and for seniors in general. They range from fun activities like games and card games and exercise classes, but we also provide classes that help seniors adapt to a changing world. We have computer literacy, internet access, and voter access. Seniors face a particularly difficult challenge as they age and try to stay up with the voting process. So we're proud to announce that we are also a site where seniors can access the permanent application for ballots to be mailed to their house instead of having to go down to the elections office and make that application annually. We have currently 1,100 members in the community, and the one major part of the community that I think that we offer better than almost anyone else is a sense of brotherhood and community and support that we offer to each of our members. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monica Comans. I'm representing Pi Sigma Alpha at the University of Montana. It's the National Political Science Honors Student Association, and as honor students in political science, we help to organize debates and policy forums such as this, and every spring we have a banquet for our students where a political speaker comes, and we help to organize other political events on campus. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are ready to begin round 2 or round 25, whichever one we want. Okay, these are now questions from the audience, and we'll still go with taking turns, and I think we had Luann first the last time, so we'll pick up with John. And the question is, could you please rank Missoula's pressing problems beyond growth? Or rather, I assume other than growth, what are pressing problems?
Well, here's what I hear most about. Traffic continues to be an issue for folks. Crime continues to be an issue for folks. It's really kind of a consequence of growth, but how do we maintain and preserve our open spaces and trail systems?
Okay.
I think people are starting to get the sense that underneath the fine quality of life that we have, and I think it came about when those two young boys suffered a beating, and before them, that young man from Ellensburg, that there is a level of violence that we need to deal with. There's a level of poverty we need to deal with. There's a level of homelessness, alcohol abuse among our young people, and then there's a meth problem in this town. So there are problems that we need to be working on as we grow, and as we grow, if we don't deal with some of those problems, the growth will just exacerbate the problems that we already have.
Okay. Luann, you first on this one. Because you've been elected to the City Council, we know you're both experienced in campaigning and in a legislative role. How are you prepared for the role of mayor? What educational, employment, or service background do you have as an executive or administrator, preparing a budget, managing department heads, and so forth?
Well, I believe, having been on council for nearly 10 years and balancing 10 budgets gives me a great deal of experience. That's one of the main things the mayor does, is prepare the budget for the City Council to review. That's major. That's how we spend taxpayers' dollars. And having done that for 10 years, and believe me, it takes a while to become familiar with all the different departments and what they need, and how do we balance the needs of all the different departments year after year? How do we prepare for the future and look out for the fact that we have capital expenses coming in our fire department? Fire engines cost a lot of money. I have had a wide variety of experience of work and life experiences in my lifetime, and have managed a statewide organization. I helped found hospice and managed the volunteers for that. I feel like I bring good, common sense, practical approach to managing the relationships that you have to have in working with 400 employees for the city.
My formal education is in journalism, where I learned to ask all sorts of questions and be a little bit skeptical to boot, and I think that served me well. That's a pretty liberal education. My informal education is as an employee of a large corporation and as a manager for that large corporation, where I was responsible for large budgets and lots of employees. My experience as an entrepreneur, I own with my wife a travel agency and an advertising and public relations agency, and that experience has taught me that sometimes you pay other people before you pay yourself, so you better pay attention to cash flow. We've hired and we've fired and we've made difficult decisions over time. And that's part of administration as well. And the city council piece has certainly, I think, prepared me legislatively. And this is largely a job about service, and I've been a volunteer in the community for all sorts of causes, and the reasons have always been the same regardless of the cause, and that is I'm interested in service, and that's what makes this community tick and run, and I think that's what makes this community wonderful.
Okay, thank you. John, this person writes, I imagine most of us believe that choices for housing are desirable for Missoula citizens as a means to achieve middle-class status or as a part of quality of life. But how can people who make minimum wage afford to buy homes that are not affordable for them?
They cannot. It's as simple as that, and that's unfortunate. So what a mayor does and what I think city government does in collaboration with all sorts of other folks is you make the city the best city you can make it. You make it as livable as you can make it. You provide the kind of amenities that attract companies that provide good employment, a living wage, terrific benefits, stability and security. You try to create a community that entices businesses like that to come here so that not everyone has to work for minimum wage. But I think if I were to answer a question that was posed earlier, again, housing affordability is critical, and it's a huge problem for our community.
You know, I think John's right. The first part of it, his answer is good in that when we create this quality of life, and that's what attracts businesses to our community. It's our neighborhoods, our open spaces, our trails. It's the way we live our lives here is so desirable that serves as a driving force for our economy, and that will attract businesses, we hope. We need to collaborate with the people in town, like the Missoula Area Economic Development Corporation and other groups, to encourage business growth, because that encourages job growth. Now that sounds nice. Now the reality is that doesn't happen a lot. You saw in the paper that perhaps we're going to have the benefit of DirecTV coming here. They will bring a large number of jobs, and they pay well, and they will give us some good benefits. In the meantime, what are we doing to look to the future, to train for the jobs that we need in the future? What are we doing to provide housing generationally so that year after year after year, that house remains approximately the same rate, so that people aren't always trying to scramble to earn more or have another job to pay for their mortgage or their rent? Stop.
Luann, what do you think of the city's handling of the aquatics project bond?
Well, in general, I think we did a good job. It's now perceived that we weren't clear enough with the public. When I first heard that discussion that it's on the bond that we said that we are buying the 50-meter pool, to be honest with you, I was taken aback, because here we thought, from listening to staff, that Swim Missoula, we had this agreement with Swim Missoula that they would provide $1.4 million of the costs providing this wonderful pool to our citizens. We had quite a job with the aquatics. As you know, it was over budget. And so we spent a lot of energy cutting from the Parks Department over the next few years, their maintenance or their upkeep budget, so that we could fund what we actually said we were going to build in the bond for people. And now this added item comes up that says we also said we were going to pay for the pool. We have put it in place in the ground near Playfair Park that the 50-meter pool will be built. It won't be built with the money from the bond, but it will be built, the basics of it have been built from the bond money, but the rest will have to be raised privately. And this little advertising campaign that's been going on about it has actually helped Swim Missoula raise money. So that's been a good outcome of it.
I think the aftermath of the passage of the aquatics bond has been this city council at its finest. In the face of adversity, in the face of unexpected challenges that come with cost overruns, this council didn't start pointing fingers, didn't try to blame anyone. Instead, I think we rolled up our sleeves and worked with staff to figure out a way to get this done. These are tremendous community assets, and they're coming to us at a price that we didn't expect through no one's fault. We had a 30% increase in the price of the raw materials that we were using to create these facilities. I think we went to the voters in good faith, and I think we've continued to operate in good faith, and we're going to have fine aquatics facilities because we made difficult choices as a council about the way we budgeted and the way we're going to deal with our budgets for the next several years. But I think we did a fine job, and I really appreciate my colleagues for their efforts in buckling down and getting it done.
Okay, thank you. And John, you again. Based on your city government experience, what is the single most important change you would make in the Missoula Charter?
Holy cow. Gosh. I have no idea. I've read the charter, and I work under the charter, and I think so far so good. I can tell you what some folks would like to change. One has to do with whether or not these elections are partisan. And I don't have particularly strong feelings about that. We do have a local government study commission that's deeply engaged as we speak in looking at our form of government in the city, and there's also one working in the county. It'll be interesting to see what recommendations come from those commissions. But today I have no real interest in opening up the charter and changing it.
Well, that's the beauty of the charter. We get to review our government every 10 years. Not every town does this. This is something that our Constitution, I believe, or the legislature says, you have the right to review your government every 10 years and see what you like or don't like about it. And Missoula, every 10 years, gets right down there. We elect people, and then we say, we want you to examine our local government and see what changes you want to make. And here they're doing it this year, and they're looking for people. They want people's input on this, because it's very important to review how we run this city. We're self-governing, and so the changes that they made last time, as John mentioned, were people voted to bring in nonpartisan elections, and they voted in neighborhood councils. And so this time, those two items are considered within the review parameters. And it will be very interesting to see what these folks come up with. They're getting to listen to everybody from around town. They talk to city council, they talk to the mayor, to neighborhood councils, to all the department heads, and to the public. They're always asking questions of the public. So if anyone has suggestions, because this is your charter, this is how we govern ourselves, it's important that you get in touch with them.
Again, to Luann, this question is from a person who says, having just received my property tax statement, as we all have, I am concerned about how the city will, in the future, fund the city services without putting senior citizens and lower-income people out of their homes.
I know, and I think it's important that, especially with senior citizens, that we start considering ways to help them get tax relief on their taxes. Because, as I said, we are just going to, because of the needs that we have as a city, with our fire department, with the public safety building, with perhaps an open space bond, and more we're going to be asking for funds from people to help us run this town and keep it at the quality that we want. People want the services that we provide. The fire station is going up to Linda Vista because they are required to answer a call within 6 minutes, 90% of the time. That's the national standard. Now, we all expect that. That new fire station will be part of a network that will then allow other fire stations and other fire engines to get to other parts of town quicker. That's why we do these things, because people want and need these services. But then to lay that on people whose incomes are fixed is not right. So what we need is advocacy from the seniors to sit down with our finance officer, with the city council, and find out ways to perhaps consider tax relief for people in certain circumstances.
John?
And I think we need to continue relentlessly to consider alternative revenue sources. And we've talked about some of those, and I'll just mention them again. Impact fees is a piece of that. Our general fee structure is a piece of that. And I really believe that local option sales tax, which works terrifically well in smaller Montana communities, ought to be an option for this community to exercise. Those alternative revenue streams, I think, are the best bet at providing relief and making sure that we're not, again, pricing folks out of their homes. It'd be interesting to have a conversation, I think, too, with aging services to talk about how folks might be able to take advantage of some of the equity, especially folks who have owned their homes for a long time. Are there ways that we can help those folks take advantage of that equity and, again, not render them overburdened and, again, feel like they have to leave their home?
Okay. To John, and then Luann. Our city will elect one of you to represent all of Missoula, and we've been hearing what you will do as a mayor. How well have you represented your respective wards, and how would your constituents evaluate your representation? Please give examples, and how would you evaluate each other's performance?
Sure. I represent Ward 1, which is the Rattlesnake Valley, downtown Missoula, the University of Montana campus proper, and a few other bits and pieces of that side of town. I represent at least one billionaire, and I represent people who sleep in cars. And I can tell you that their interests are simply not the same. And my job is to try to find that balance every day. My job is to also find a balance between short-term personal interests and long-term public good. Those are difficult things to do. I try to make long-term decisions, and I try to represent my constituents, but I also try to represent good judgment, and I also have to take into account the needs of the city of Missoula as a whole. If the primary election was any indication, I did pretty well in the ward I represent. When I was running for mayor, there are folks who don't like me. There are folks who don't like the way I vote. There are folks who don't agree with me. I think any elected official who's worth his or her salt is going to find that. You don't please everybody all the time, but you try to compromise where you can. You try to be practical. You try to listen. You try to make informed, long-term decisions that benefit the community. And I'm not even going to begin to criticize Luann. That's the voters' responsibility, and voters will make a choice, and that's the way we work.
I feel the same way about critiquing John. I was appointed in 1996. I had helped start the Slant Street Neighborhood Association. I represent the ward that we call kind of the heart of town. It starts at Bernice's Bakery, 3rd Avenue. It goes all the way to Russell. It goes all the way to the mountain, and then all the way down to North Avenue. So it's huge, but it's kind of the heart of town. It's a great ward. A lot of the old part of town is in Ward 3. And I've lived there for almost 25 years. And I was appointed in '96, and I was successful in both my attempts to run as a candidate, and the second time I ran unopposed. So in general, I feel like people feel I represent them well. I think over time, John made the point, you start out as a ward representative. Now, we had Stevens Avenue to deal with, we have the roundabout at Higgins, you have very specific issues in your ward. But as growth continued and we started to see the effects of that, you realize that everything is interrelated, and you have to start balancing what is right for that ward, how does it fit in with everything else. The one thing I've tried to do is give people a voice in the decisions that impact their lives. That's been my job for the last 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Luann, how would you make Missoula feel safer?
Again, referring back to those beatings, I think when people read about the beatings in the paper, they were shocked. They said, this isn't Missoula. It's not the Missoula I know. And now we've come to see through the police saying to us, oftentimes people do experience violence, but they don't report it. But the police are aware of it. The police have told us, in order to help people feel safe and this town be safe, they need to know what's happening on the ground. If they don't know what's happening, they can't keep track, they can't provide for those situations. So it's important, and let's face it, we oftentimes have what we call neighborhood watch. That's the beauty of the wonderful neighborhoods we have. People watch out for one another. But as we grow and new people come in, maybe there isn't the connection that we ordinarily feel, and things might happen. Now, one thing that we did start was that report every Sunday in the paper about the burglaries, vandalism, things like that. And I know from talking to people watch that to see where things are happening. And that's a good indicator of what's going on and what's being taken. And perhaps through that we can understand why those things go on. So I think it's awareness, and it's also keeping the police informed.
We still have some work to do in terms of catching up. We have not funded our police department in a way that keeps pace with growth. And we've made some strides in the last two budgets to do that. We've put upwards of 12 or 14 officers on the street, and I think that's important. And that's a piece of the puzzle. But the other piece of the puzzle here is us. We need to share responsibility. We need to participate in our own safety. As Luann says, we need to tell law enforcement agencies when something happens, when something concerns us. Big or small, our police officers want to know what's going on, and only when they know what's going on can we work either through enforcement actions or through policy changes or through budget changes to address those issues. But if we don't know, we can't help, and that's one of the things I learned when I was president of the Missoula Downtown Association. Police are much more effective when they have partners, and we're the partners. We're the folks who can help them. And we have that shared responsibility, and that will enhance our safety.
Okay, John, would you agree with a citizen at an earlier forum who suggested that to do the roundabout at Higgins and Beckwith, there should be a button for pedestrians to push when they need to cross through this? This is a pretty specific question.
My understanding of a roundabout, the modern roundabout that works, is that wouldn't be necessary. And in fact, that's kind of the point of a roundabout. Is it's a much safer way to control an intersection and provide for pedestrian safety. So I don't think a light is necessary under those circumstances.
From the designs that we've seen, if you're coming into the roundabout at that area, you're going to have stop or broad white stripes long before you get into the intersection that tells the car that you're approaching the intersection and this is where the pedestrians get to cross. Hopefully, we're trying this out. It's been done many other places, and that we'll find that it will be safer. We're hoping that that will be safer for kids rather than having cars stopped at a stop sign and then having little people go across in front of them, especially in the morning when people want to get on with their business. But we've been told and we've been shown that the design actually should help pedestrians cross the street. It's a smaller area to cross.
Well, it was inevitable that we'd get something along these lines. The question, could you please assess the city's handling of infill housing? Luann.
Okay. Well, I think we've done some good work and some not so good work. When we talk about infill, the way we're talking about it now are places like the Champion Mill site, where it's vacant ground, the lumber company out on Russell, and the redevelopment that's going to happen through MRA Erd 3 along Brooks from Mount down to Reserve. Infill, meaning we take empty spaces or undeveloped or places that need, or blighted areas that need some pep, and we put in density. We try to mix the uses of residential and business, and we get amenities for that through landscaping. Now, people have been pretty upset that we went against our zoning. They feel like we went against our zoning by using the tools that we approved back in '99 to allow this, what we've come to know are the dark side of infill, when we pack houses in to well-established neighborhoods. And as I said, citizens had to come to us and tell us, enough's enough. We took away their protest rights. When we allowed these rules, we thought that there would be a better process. So now both those things are on the shelf, and we have to go back to the drawing board and start again.
There are two versions of infill. One is the one that I think makes sense, and that is we build housing in the core of our community that's close to services that are already established because it's less expensive. It takes advantage of our resources and our infrastructure. It doesn't lead to additional traffic necessarily. There are all sorts of good reasons for doing that, and it works pretty well in theory. Here's the other kind of infill. It's the infill that my mother talks to me about at dinner on Sunday night, and this is the turn of phrase she used. I don't like infill. Okay. The theory is pretty good. Some of our practice has not been great, so we need to meet in the middle. I think wherever possible, we redevelop and we make sense of those redevelopment opportunities. We take advantage of them whenever we can, where it makes sense, where it works in neighborhoods. Where it doesn't, as Luann suggested earlier, I said let's quit squabbling over where we don't want to build, and let's start talking about where we do want to build and how we're going to do that so that we can provide some of those choices that I talked about earlier.
This question has to do with the school district, even though we recognize that that's a separate governmental entity. But the question is, as mayor, what would you do to encourage the school district to help to keep open schools in older established neighborhoods?
I get that one first?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I went to Willard Grade School for 8 years, which is now Willard Alternative High School. It was a great neighborhood school, and I think still serves as a neighborhood school in a different way. As mayor, I would encourage the voting populace to elect school board members who are smart enough to figure out ways to keep those schools open in neighborhoods. Bullet dodged.
I think this is a real sore point for a lot of people. Many people feel like, well, the population is moving out, we don't have the same birth rate, and so it's fine to close schools. But it's a circle. It's a loop. If we close schools, then people move out. I think, for one, we have to start building a better relationship with the school board so that we can work together to look at the fact that if we're doing planning, it has to involve the school board. They are so much a vital part of what goes on in this town. This is about our families and where they're living. And if John says he wants people to be living close in to services, that's schools. Schools are the heart of our neighborhoods. And when you lose a school like we lost Roosevelt in Ward 3, that took a lot of the heart out of that neighborhood. Fortunately, it went to St. Joe's, so there's still a school there. It's very vital, and that's great. But that connection of city planning and where our growth is going to happen and what that means when people leave the inner core is so important that we need to communicate that to our school board and have them work with us.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of the questions that we have from the audience, so we'll return to the set of questions from the that the league and committees put together. Just in case you thought we were out of questions. So, Luann, back to you.
Okay.
If you are elected, what criteria will you use to select the city's chief administrative officer?
I think this is one of the most important positions that there is in city government. This person helps oversee the department heads and the running of the city. This person is a helpmate to the mayor. I think this position deserves a national search where we take into account professionalism, experience, management experience. And the criteria, again, would have to be and this might be a good idea, is to ask the people who work in the city. Do a random survey of the staff, the city of Missoula, and say, what do you need in a chief administrative officer? Instead of coming top down, ask them, because they've dealt with 2 or 3, I'm sure a lot of folks have worked for the city a long time. Some are very new. Some have very little experience with the most recent administrative officer. This would be an important criteria for me. What do people who will work under that person think that person needs to have for qualifications? It needs to be somebody who can balance my personality, my goals, my way of doing things. It has to be a team effort. We have to have a united front. So there's a lot that goes into this, and it would be exciting to find the right person.
And I agree with much of what Luann said, and I think at least a regional search would be appropriate. And the only thing I'd add is that I think whoever holds that position needs to be enormously creative. Someone who can think on his or her feet and take advantage of opportunities and think creatively about how to solve problems and address issues. And sometimes that instinct comes in the most unusual packages. So I think it's exciting to consider.
Okay, thank you. Luann, this next question has to do with city ordinances. And it reminds me that, beg your pardon?
It's history.
Is it John's turn? Oh, is that true? It is, isn't it? Letting you off the hook, okay. As I said, I'm reminded that it wasn't really too long ago that Missoula still had on the books things like women shouldn't be wearing pants on the street and things like that. So I don't know whether we still have some weird ones like that. But this question is, what specific city ordinances do you see as having the most pressing need to be changed? And how would you advocate city council rewrite them?
Well, you know, we had, at the behest of the county, a fairly exhaustive review of the Office of Planning and Grants and the rules and regulations that the Office of Planning and Grants enforces and interprets. And I think that's a set of rules and regs that could use some scrutiny. I don't think we necessarily have to explode those rules, but I think we can certainly streamline them, update them, and make some more sense of them. It's not an easy process. It's going to take some time, but I think that's where I'd begin.
I agree with that as well. I mean, it was fairly clear from that report that people who go in to be served by our planning office don't really understand or have a hard time understanding the rules and regulations. The fact is, perhaps some of the people working there don't have a clear understanding, because we're told that oftentimes different messages are given regarding the same rule or ordinance. Now, we're talking about zoning ordinances like the sign ordinance, things that oversee how we develop in our community. When people come in for a sign permit, or when people come in for a building permit, that should be a fairly straight, upfront process. And that's the whole point, is how do we make this city government more efficient, more professional? So I would start the same place, as John mentioned, with the zoning ordinances, in the planning office. And again, it's going to be difficult because rewriting them, mostly because they're cumbersome, basically. And we're going to have to find somebody who knows how to do this and get them on the job.
Okay, now see if I can
No,
keep this
it's my
straight.
turn.
You're next, right? Increase of public transportation is often cited as a solution to the traffic congestion issue and as a planned response to growth. What financial resources would you use to fund increased public transit?
Well, when we talk to the people at the mountain line, and this is a director, he'll often say that when they go out for grants for new equipment or the ability to increase their lines, their transportation routes, they oftentimes come to the city and ask for matching grants. Now, I don't know how that happens, but he reports that we don't often match completely what he requests. So I think the main thing would be to sit down with these guys and figure out, if we want more transit, how do we help them? Now, if that means going in with them to find grants, or if it means, what you have to understand is this is its own taxing jurisdiction. When whoever wrote the question about their property tax bill, they'll see that MUTD is its own taxing jurisdiction, so you're paying for that. So I'm not sure how we could increase that, because they take care of that. They decide their own amount. I think working with them and finding out the best way that we can encourage transit ridership and help them find ways to improve their service would be the first thing to do.
But we're going to have to continue with you.
Why don't I take another turn? I love it. Okay.
Okay, another question.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Missoula should annex all outlying areas that request sewer backup?
Sewer backup?
Or sewer, I think. Sewer, excuse me, hookup. I read that wrong. Yeah, we don't want backup,
Well-
do we?
At least it shows I'm still listening. And I know what it
And
means.
I can't read. Okay.
Well, this is an interesting question. You know, for a long time, we had a sewer contract committee. And that would be the mayor, the building department head, different department heads within the city who had jurisdiction or had some input into how we were growing. And so, say, for instance, somebody way out on Mullen Road wants to develop their land, and they would come in and say, I need the sewer. Well, depending on what it would take and what it would cost and what it would mean for development for the city, we could say yes or no, or we could help advise them. Then the legislature in 2003 passed a law that said, from now on, you're able to annex, zone, and subdivide at the same time. Before, it was a much more cumbersome process. So once those three things could happen, then it became much more feasible for developers to say, I want to get zoned, I want to get subdivided, and I want to get annexed. And that's when we started to have this influx. And we've made a decision that lots of times in the long run, it's better if we do that. I'm certainly not for aggressive annexation, but if we have a piece of property that's fairly close to city, I think it's important that we bring them in and review that subdivision so that we have it done at city standards rather than having to go back and retrofit later.
Okay. Now, did John answer the public transportation question? No, so
I had to flee for a moment.
okay. All right. Well, you're still on the hook.
Public transportation, I don't know that I'd necessarily be interested. I don't know that I'd necessarily be interested in increasing funding so much as trying to figure out ways to increase the usage of the system that we have in place today. I think public transportation is something that makes sense incrementally, and I think it's important that we have a skeleton in place, which we do, and as circumstances change, I think we put more meat on those bones. We apply more resources when it becomes less convenient to use a vehicle and more convenient to use public transportation. I think that's when we kind of ratchet up that funding scale. And I'm just going to guess that the next question is about annexation and whether I pursue
It is, and you missed the
sure, whether I'm interested in aggressively annexing.
has to do with annexing, areas that request sewer hookup.
Sure, I think that's generally a good idea. I think it's a good idea to annex before folks live there. Typically, our experience with annexing after folks live somewhere is not always great, and it comes with some different expectations. So I think wherever we're providing city services, we ought to be annexing, and that's I caught the last bit of what Luann was saying. When folks want to build subdivisions that are a little bit outside our typical city limits, I think it makes good sense for us to annex those because we get something in return in addition to impact fees, which we've talked about before. We get, pardon me. We get building inspections, we get homes or commercial buildings that are built to city standards, and we get infrastructure that's built to city standards. So I think all that is a decent payoff as a function of annexation.
Okay, thank you. So, and John, to you again. Small businesses make downtown and neighborhood commercial areas viable. How will you support small businesses once you are mayor?
Sure. Well, I own and operate a couple of small businesses in downtown Missoula, and that's where we choose to do business for all sorts of reasons that are in some ways cultural, Some have to do with entertainment. Lots of it has to do with convenience, and lots of it has to do with our customers. I would continue to support downtown business in the way that I have as a business person, as a city council person. I've supported our business improvement district. I've supported our police efforts on bicycles downtown. I continue to believe that we can do things to enhance downtown in the long term. One of those things, I think, is a new Safeway downtown to serve as another retail anchor and another reason for folks to come downtown. I think strengthening St. Patrick Hospital and providing more opportunity for St. Pat's to grow and employ more people makes a great deal of sense, and that only, I think, enhances downtown and downtown's long-term viability. We have lots of opportunities left downtown, which is very cool. And Jeff Badnock was a big part of that, and I think he would agree that we have more to do.
I also work downtown for small business, and I've worked down there for almost 20 years, and I love the feel of downtown. And regardless of if you get a better deal out on the Reserve Street, people still love to come downtown for the ambiance, because there's something about the feel of it. I mean, think about Farmers Market on Saturdays. Think about the cultural events, the galleries we have, the first Friday of the month for walking around the galleries. What I think is vital for downtown to stay enhanced is to bring housing down there. I would love to see some housing for young families. I mean, other towns are doing what they call green housing, where you allow people to, the more energy efficient a building is, the higher you can go. But with that comes the amenity of a daycare center. What you're trying to provide is livability. I'm sure a lot of you in this room remember when there was a hardware store downtown. And that was great. It made it feel like a neighborhood. And that's what my goal would be, is to help the downtown feel more like a neighborhood, invite people to live there, and that will create the vibrancy that you need, people going in and out of stores and using the services down there.
You have in your answer something that relates to the next question, and that is, what examples or models from other cities or other mayors, or in our own mayor, would you think it's a good idea to model yourselves after, or model the city after? What would you choose from other places or as examples too?
Let's see. You know, there's a League of Cities that we belong to nationally. There's a mayor's conference that allows people to get online and get good ideas from people. The first thing that comes to mind is San Francisco just passed an ordinance or a resolution that it would not buy, the city of San Francisco would not buy or try not to buy any products that were produced by countries that use child labor. I mean, that's a very progressive step to take. And we recently were asked that question in one of our forums. I think it was the City Club. And I said I would support something like that. I mean, Missoula is the kind of town that will support any attempt to treat people fairly around the world. We try to be fair. That's one principle or a value that Missoulians hold. And so to think that we are doing something that creates fairness for other people who provide us goods would be important. I've been to Vancouver, and I love what they've done with their downtown. That's what I was talking about when you bring housing downtown. Some people talk about workforce housing. What if the people at St. Pat's who work there, instead of driving to Florence, could just walk across the street to their house or their apartment building with the restaurant on the top floor? There are all kinds of things that we could be doing.
You know, pardon me, I don't know that there are any perfect cities or perfect leaders, but if there were a perfect city, I think it would include some of these things. I think it would include open space that's accessible to all of its citizens. I think it would include housing choices and opportunity for home ownership. I think it would be a safe place to live. I think the water would be clean and the air would be breathable. I think there would be educational opportunities. I think there would be cultural amenities. I think the leaders would be smart, engaging, practical, cooperative, fair, reasonable. And there's probably a song about milk and honey here as well. But that's just what's off the top of my head.
Thank you. And with that, I think we are basically out of time. We'll turn this over now to Arlene, who I think is going to summarize and say goodnight.
Yes, I want to thank all of you who came out tonight to attend this forum, and thank also all the people who are at home watching this forum. And thank you again, John and Luann, for again answering all these questions to help the voters decide who they would like for mayor. I would also like to thank the MCAT crew for making this possible to be presented to the broader community, and to Sharon Barrett for doing a very fine job of asking questions this evening. I also would like to thank the co-sponsors, the Missoula Aging Services, the Missoula Senior Citizen Center, and the Pi Sigma Alpha organization from the university. In leaving, I want to remind you that you should please vote on November 8th. We like to have a good turnout so that whoever we elect is representative of the larger portion of the voters. So thank you again for coming. Good night.